My name is Rachel, and I thought I'd give just like a little bit of background on like kind of who I am. And you may have seen it on the flyer, but I'm a singer and a songwriter. I graduated from Chapman University with a music degree, and after that, I kind of went to LA and worked with different people that specialize in different fields. I worked with a woman named Judy Stakey, which if you look up, if you're interested in songwriting, kind of a different path, but she was a publisher at Warner Chappell for many years, and now she does like workshops and stuff. So I interned with her, and then I kind of worked with a bunch of people out there, and I teach private lessons, and then also I do some singing for film and television, which was listed on the flyer. But a few of the things were Glee, the middle, and the most recent thing that I did was on Stumptown. It was on ABC, and it was like a fight scene between two, like the main character and this kind of like the villain, and they did like a full-on combat scene, and my voice underscored it, singing Girls Just Want to Have Fun from Cyndi Lauper. So that's just kind of a little like brief Cliff Notes background thing. So this masterclass is kind of focused on vocal health, and a few people ask questions about volume and stuff like that. So I'll try to kind of address that, and also like just keeping up good habits, how to protect your voice, and how to be singing for a long time, and not, it kind of, we've heard some, oh, if you don't, if you don't use it, you use it sort of thing. So, okay, so we'll just jump in. So, why is vocal health important? Well, your voice is part of your body. Every other instrument, I always say, exists outside of you, whereas your voice exists within you. So, I mean, it's just so crucial to the longevity of your voice to take care of your instrument. Tami had mentioned some younger kids that are in here, and even, I mean, really regardless of age, it's important. I always use the example of, if you purchase a $10,000 viola, and you would never just leave it in your hot car, right? Because it would get all warped, and you would take such good care of it, right? And you'd be like, okay, how do I protect it? Because you spent a lot of money, a ton of money on it, right? And even if it got destroyed, you could replace it. Like, it would be very expensive, you'd have to save, but you could replace it. Your voice is so much more valuable because you can't get a new one. You only have the one. So it's just very important to be aware of vocal health. So I always kind of use that example. And a really good example of somebody who I noticed who did this really well was actually a worship leader at Saddleback Church. I grew up singing there. And for many years, they had
You're muted.
unmute. Can you hear me now? Okay, perfect. So he probably did like between 5 and 8 services a weekend, multiple songs plus rehearsals. So he's using his voice a lot, or he was at that time. And his voice sounded like smooth. And like a 25, 30-year-old voice, even as he got older and into his 50s, he was able to maintain really, really good vocal health. So he was somebody that took care of his voice. And I use this example in my private lessons when I'm kind of talking about doing vocal exercises and the importance of that, good vocal warm-ups, because I was friends with his daughter, or some of his kids kind of growing up. And I do remember one time at his house, we were kind of all in the bottom area, hanging out. And upstairs, you could hear the shower on, and you could hear Rick Machow doing his vocal exercises, no, 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 all those kinds of things. So Mercedes kind of mentioned, what are some things I can do to get back into singing? Vocal exercises are like a huge part of that. So, okay, so the next thing I had on here is just basic singing technique. So technique is a really important part of having good vocal health. That's definitely one element of it. So I start out all my lessons with posture and breathing. And for those of you who have maybe taken lessons before, it might be a bit of a review, but you know, in posture wise, you want to kind of be sitting up nice and tall, right? And then you want to have area for room for your diaphragmatic breaths or belly breaths, which is how we breathe when we sing. So, you know, there's many things that are beneficial when it comes to posture. But basically you don't want, and I'll kind of stand up to this, but you don't want your hips like protruding in either direction. You don't want your shoulders all up tight. You want everything to kind of be nice and relaxed. You want your chin to be tucked under, slightly tucked under, and your eyes at eye level. And this is kind of an interesting thing because people have this notion that, you know, when I go to hit the high notes, I should be reaching my chin up and this is going to help me get them. But that's actually, you know, not the case. You want to keep your chin tucked under, eyes at eye level, and then use your breath and vocal registers, different vocal registers to reach the high notes. So that's kind of posture. Breathing, I'll just touch on very briefly for those who maybe don't know. But in singing, we use what's called belly breathing or diaphragmatic breathing rather than chest breathing. So if you take in a deep breath, you can kind of see my shoulders and everything going up and down. And that is a more shallow breath and doesn't really give you the level of air and the level of support that you need for healthy singing and also for volume. If you kind of have trouble projecting your voice, getting these good diaphragmatic breaths or belly breaths is really important. So oftentimes if you're around singing a lot or you're kind of, you know, in a play or something, or you might hear people say, oh, you need to sing from your diaphragm. And this is what they're talking about. You need to get good diaphragmatic breaths or belly breaths and use the support of that breath and the surrounding muscles to have, you know, a clear and healthy sound. So what that kind of looks like, I can kind of like stand up, you can kind of see. So you can see if I breathe in, my belly expands, my back also kind of expands like that. And that's the kind of breathing that you're wanting to do when you're singing. And there's a few different ways that you can kind of train yourself to breathe this way. One way is this is what I have my students do a lot of times. You put your hands here on your tummy and then you actually bend over and look at the ground, almost like you're peeking over the edge of like the Grand Canyon or something. Although you probably don't want to do that because then you would probably go over. But anyway, you relax your muscles and then you can kind of feel your stomach fall out. That's kind of one way to trick yourself into doing that. You can also do it sitting down on a chair, same thing. And you can do it laying down. A lot of times, like singing teachers will have you lay down and just feel that rise and fall of your stomach. That is that kind of belly breath that we're talking about. So those are kind of a few different ways that you can start experimenting with that. It's really the most important thing when it comes to, at least in my lessons, I really focus on breathing. We talk about it all the time, and using the breath, connecting to the breath is just a really important thing. So let me think. So one little exercise, just to kind of throw out an exercise for you guys, would be to breathe in on the count of 8. So you'd go, you know, and I can't really like breathe in, speak at the same time, but you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and you should feel your belly expand. And if it gets full, just hold it there. And then on an exhale, you exhale on a hiss. So if you want to try it, you're muted, so you can try it, but like that. So you exhale on a and you can do that in on 8, out on 8, in on 8, out on 10, in on 8, out for as long as you can go. That kind of prolongs your breath. So we had a question about, you know, how to best utilize your breath so that you don't run out of volume or you don't like peter out at the end of a phrase. A lot of times we can maybe have the belly breathing down and we're like, oh yeah, I breathe from my diaphragm, that's great. But then we let out too much air at once. So if you're singing like a phrase, you know, do you ever feel, and that's like, okay, now my breath's all gone. So versus do you ever feel like a plastic bag, you know, where it's like more moderated. So this type of exercise can help with that, because you're by doing that hissing sounds, you're preventing all your air from just kind of coming out. So, and you can kind of feel like almost like a little tug in your breath. And the key is, it's like the mind body connection type of thing, to really focus on that when you're doing it, because a lot of improving in singing, at least what I found, is being very aware of kind of like what's happening in your body, and then being like, oh, that worked. I felt that. Can I recreate it? Can I do it again? And can I apply it? You know, I really felt my breath in this exercise. Can I now do it in a song? So, so that's a really good one for like prolonging your breath, like getting your breath through a long phrase. And also utilizing your breath to have, you know, a presence to your voice, and not kind of peter out quickly. So let's see, I like wrote down a ton of stuff, and we'll just kind of see, you know, what we want to focus on. And then I was thinking at the end, maybe doing questions. So, okay. We'll talk about vocal registers next. So, have you guys ever heard of kind of different vocal registers before? I can only see like 3 people, but if you want to kind of say like, yes, I've heard about vocal registers, or no, I haven't. Just, what about yes, yes, and no? Okay. So, you know, just like I kind of compare sometimes like the study of voice and everything to like nutrition and stuff. Like there's a lot of different, it's a science because it's part of your body. So there's differing opinions, there's different experts, there's different levels of expertise in it. I would say probably the highest expertise would be an ENT that focuses specifically on the voice. One that I think of off the top of my head that a lot of people in LA like go to and know about is Dr. Gupta. And you can look on her website, and she has a ton of information about vocal health on there. So, but that's why, and then, you know, what people have all sorts of different opinions, and it's kind of, it does change over time, just like any science does. So anyway, there are people who are like, your voice should all just be one register and blah, blah, blah. But there is some proof that your voice functions a little bit differently in different registers. So I'll just go through the main ones that we talk about the most. So there's vocal fry. That's kind of this, where the Kardashians talk. That's the vocal fry. So there's vocal fry. Then there's your, I think it's called the modal voice, but it's your chest voice. And that's your speaking voice. That's the voice that you use the most. So if you put your hand on your chest, you can try it out and say, you know, hi, my name is Rachel. You can usually feel sympathetic vibrations in your chest. That's kind of how it got coined, the chest voice. And then you have your head voice, which is up here. Hello. And the head voice can be separated out, you know, into falsetto or whistle tone, but usually people call chest and head voice. And then you have notes where these two voices, these two registers sort of overlap, and that would be your mixed voice or your middle voice. And the mixed and middle voice is getting those two, your chest and head voice, to work together. When it comes to vocal health, vocal balance, and also volume and all this other stuff, vocal balance is super, super important. So most people speak in their chest voice. There's like a few outliers who, you know, I've met that use their head voice, but most people speak in their chest voice. So just like I always use the analogy of if you had your arm in a cast for a year, and then you got it out, the muscles would be kind of atrophied, right? It'd be weaker because you haven't been using it. And it's kind of the same thing with your head voice. Most people don't use their head voice. They don't speak in it. So it's just weaker, like, and the muscles that kind of function with it are weaker. Yes. Oh, you're muted. I don't know.
I got a question more regarding my daughter than myself, because she is 6 and she still modulates between her head voice and her chest voice when she speaks.
Uh-huh.
So she spends hours speaking in her head voice, but
Yeah.
then also depending on the occasion, she goes switches over into her chest voice. How can I support her to keep that up? Because that will help her later with singing, yeah, and voice modulation.
Yeah, so that's great. I think, you know, if your daughter's speaking more in her head voice, I think everyone kind of has a natural way that they speak, you know, and that's good. I wouldn't necessarily say like you need to change it. I mean, I think if you naturally speak more in your chest voice, it's good to kind of, you know, experiment with raising that up a bit. And she's only 6, so you'll kind of see the changes. And you could always say, you know, if you notice that I don't think that speaking in your chest voice is necessarily a bad thing. If you
I think you misunderstood me.
Okay.
Because I actually appreciate the fact that she modulates between the two voices, because it trains both of her quote unquote registers, and it will help her later with singing. So some people, they tell you when you have trouble, you know, projecting in a speech, they tell you speak as if you sing. But to her, I would love to tell her, sing as if you speak, because when you're speaking, you're already singing, because she goes like up and down and modulates from very deep to very up high with. So it's just wonderful to listen. So I want her to keep it up.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to, you're telling me, yeah, don't tell her to stop it. But what I'm thinking about is, how do I support her keeping it up?
Yeah, I mean, I would just encourage her to keep doing that. And then also, you know, you can do exercises with, you know, like vocal sirens and stuff like that, that kind of go back and forth between the registers and play with your voice. But if she's doing that naturally, then I would just encourage it. I mean, that's really, and you
How
know,
do you encourage it? It's more of a pedagogic question.
right. I mean, you'd have to like work with, you know, you're with her, I would assume, pretty often. So I would just like, you know, if you start noticing like a heaviness to her voice or a changing, you know, you can kind of encourage her, you know, I would play around honestly with it. And that's kind of what I say, just in general, is like kind of exactly what you're saying, that, you know, people, I think a lot of times have the mentality of like, oh, I'm going to sing now, and this is my singing voice. And it's like, your voice is your voice, whether you're speaking or singing or, you know, at doing anything else. So I think kind of encouraging that mentality by just talking about it, and using, you know, exercises like sirens, because sirens do that pretty much. I mean, that's one exercise that I like encourage a lot, is to go from the bottom of your range to the top, back to the bottom on a siren, and kind of feel how you're going through. But also like you know, your voice doesn't really mature until you're 20. So like, and it changes a lot, like just like when everything else is changing, like in the, you know, depending on who you are, like 10 to 15, 17-year-old range. So, you know, your voice is going to go through just natural changes. And like I said, you can, you know, if that answer is not, doesn't address what you're saying, I'm doing my best to answer. But if that, you know, doesn't address, you can always look on Dr. Gupta's like website and see if you can find more information that would suit that. So I'm going to move on. But thank you for your question. So, okay, so let's talk about the next kind of thing I have on here is vocal anatomy, and kind of the different sets of muscles that control different parts of the voice. And that might, you know, also be something that interests you. Let's see. Oh, never mind. I just saw something in the chat and I was looking at it. So, okay, so there's like, and if you wouldn't mind just muting your mic again, because I can hear myself. Like, yeah, thank you. Okay, so there's like 2 major sets of muscles that we talk about when we talk about the head and chest voice, and maybe this information will kind of enlighten what you're talking about with your question with your daughter. But you have the CT muscles, which are the cricothyroid muscles, which control primarily the head voice, and they sit kind of on top of the voice. And then you have the TA muscles with the thyroid, I can almost like thyroid, I can't really say it, but those muscles which control primarily your chest voice. And and getting a great mixed voice, which is what a lot of people have a question about, getting a great mixed voice kind of has to do with getting those two muscles to cooperate with each other and communicate with each other. And just like anything else, doing exercises and kind of playing with your voice can help with that communication. So the CT muscles, they're your head voice muscles. They tend to be weaker if you're not using it, but like if your daughter's using it, that's great. And you should encourage her to continue that, you know. And then they lengthen the chords, and these muscles actually sit on the bottom. I might have flipped that, but yeah, they sit on the bottom of your voice, even though they're controlling the head voice, which is the higher notes. So the pterothyroid muscles, or the TA muscles, which I think I'm saying that wrong, but the TA muscles are part of your chest voice, and they actually like fatten the chords and tend to be stronger because usually people are using them more often. And then a mix is getting them to work together. Another thing to remember when it comes to vocal health is that, you know, your voice in general is like pretty delicate. So it's, you know, about the size of like your thumbnail is about the size of your vocal cords, and they're soft and, you know, kind of tender, you know, so you want to be just like careful, you know, with your voice, just given everything's happening. I heard it described as like numerous like micro functions happening within the space of a quarter. So when you think about that, it's like, whoa, you know, that's pretty crazy. So, okay. So then you have what's called your false vocal cords, which if you kind of just Google like vocal box and look at the anatomy of it, you can see, and especially if you say, they have like a more scientific name, but if you Google, you know, vocal box, false vocal cords, there are some diagrams that will show it, but it's like this, a little bit of like muscle tissue, or, you know, whatever it is, surround on the outside of your vocal cords. So you have your true vocal cords, or your true vocal folds, and then you have this stuff around it. So a lot of times when people are having vocal issues, or they're like pushing too hard, it will be because they're trying to use their false vocal cords, and they're using extrinsic muscles that shouldn't be involved with your singing, rather than the combination of your breath flow and these other two CT and TA muscles that I talked about. So, okay, so that's that. Just to kind of give you a little overview, you have like articulators and resonators. So your articulators are going to be your jaw, tongue, lips, and your soft palate. For those of you who don't know what a soft palate is, go ahead and feel with your tongue along the roof of your mouth. You should feel your hard palate, and that's it. But if you kind of keep going backwards, you'll get to the squishy part, and that's your soft palate. Yeah, so those are your articulators. I have in here, which I'll say generally, you know, your tongue can get sort of in the way, I guess, if you're singing. So when you do an ah, like if you drop your jaw to an ah, you want the tip of your tongue usually to be by your bottom teeth, and to be relaxed. Okay, so then you also have resonators, and your resonators, kind of where you feel the sound, is nasal, mouth, throat, and chest. Okay, so so if you do end up taking vocal lessons, or if you do end up taking vocal lessons, or, you know, you go to like a group vocal class or musical theater or whatever, each exercise that your vocal coach gives you kind of has a specific vocal goal. And so one exercise that is really good, that I really encourage people to do, is called a trill, which if you've taken vocal lessons before, you probably like have experienced a little bit of that. So like, that would be, that's a trill. Or this kind of helps get the lips going. Yes, but you can also do it without it, right? And you can do that on a scale or arpeggio. I flipped those. The first one was the arpeggio, the second one was the scale. But and then you can also just do it kind of like what Katherina was saying, where, you know, her daughter has the right idea, just playing around with your voice, going, not even necessarily on a pitch, just kind of getting your voice moving and flexible is really good thing. So the great thing about a trill is it's putting your voice in a perfect balance of breath support and muscle engagement, and it's kind of forcing you into that balance. And so it's training your voice to kind of function in a very specific way. I haven't looked this up, not that, but this next thing I'm gonna say, but there's some sort of trend with a straw or like singing through a straw. I don't know if you guys have heard it, but basically one of the people that I work with kind of said that a trill does the same thing as this straw technique that people are talking about, where it's getting your voice to function in this way. So when you're doing vocal exercises, humming, starting smaller is usually better to get your chords warmed up. So like a trill, a hum, and then slowly, ah is where you're kind of most exposed as a singer. Okay, so let me see. One other thing about technique and how this is more of like a mentality thing, and this word picture was told to me and I was like, oh, that's just like so perfect for this. But it's, you know, if you feel like when you're singing, you're like grabbing onto a tree trunk, like, I've got this, I'm not gonna crack, and I'm totally in control, you're probably doing it wrong. You're probably using extrinsic muscles and you're all tight, right? If you feel like you're walking on a tightrope and like you're kind of in a state of perfect balance, then you're probably doing it correctly. And it's kind of this weird thing because mentally you want to feel like, and the thing about walking on tightrope, if you think about it, you know, if you're an acrobat and you're doing it all the time, you're confident, right? Because you know what you're doing. It takes time and skill set to kind of get there, but we want to prevent or try not to have a lot of tension and tightness around our voice. So, okay, so what are things that can affect our sound? The shape of the vowel can actually, the shape of your vowel can actually determine what set of muscles is more engaged. So longer vowels and more open vowels tend to engage more of your head voice, whereas shorter and wider tend to engage more of your chest voice. By lengthening the vowel, your soft palate, which we talked about earlier, lifts, and by shortening it, it lowers. So for classical singing, you use almost primarily your head voice exclusively. So you lengthen the vowels for that. And then for your chest voice, for classical singing, you use more of your head voice. And so you use longer vowels usually. For pop, you usually are using more of your chest voice or going for more of that type of a sound. So your vowels are usually not going to be as long. This also depends on where you are in your register. So let's see. Oohs and e's are more head voice vowels. If you're singing in chest, you need to change the shape a little bit. Okay, let me see. We'll do mouth shape changes, the way your muscles function. We talked about that. Classical is long and narrow. Pop is wide and short. We talked about that. Okay, and so we'll do a little soft palate thing quickly. And so if you say the word up, and if you're muted, you can say it up. When you say the word up, your soft palate lifts. And if you say the word nuh-uh, it lowers. So that you can kind of feel the difference. And you can also look in the mirror and you can kind of see it as well. So good. Okay. So then the last thing here, when we talk about cracking and like the transition in your voice between registers, there are certain things that can kind of inhibit you from getting the notes out clearly. And one of those things is unvoiced consonants. So this is where voices commonly crack because your chords don't fully adduct or come together on these consonants. So the solution for that is to change the consonant out with a consonant that does help your chords adduct. I've kind of noticed this isn't as crucial in notes that are easy for you, like your lower range, but if you happen to hit one of these on a high, like either like a belt or like kind of, you know, anywhere that's kind of on a border, it does help, does really help you get the notes out if you switch these out. So the unvoiced consonants are C, F, H, K, P, Q, S, and T. And for C, you would replace it with a G. For F, you would replace it with a V. For H, you would replace it with a small glottal. You don't want to like do glottals all the time, but like if it's not bad for you, if it's not too hard. And then a K, you would replace with a G. A P, you'd replace with a B. A Q with a G, U, kind of a GU sound. An S with a Z, and then a T with a D. So, okay, so the last thing we'll talk about is vocal injuries and then also like vocal health tips and prevention of these things happening. If you go to the Dr. Gupta's website, she actually has a lot of information on like a bunch of different vocal injuries. If you're a hypochondriac, wouldn't recommend it. It can really kind of mess with you, but it is like, you know, good information. So, vocal injuries are most often caused by singing too much, too loud, or with poor technique. I'm just going to talk about 2 vocal injuries today, the ones that are kind of more commonly talked about, but there are a bunch of them. And to some degree, you know, you want to do everything you can to protect your voice, but to some degree, I kind of use the analogy of, you know, if you're an athlete, like somebody who's a football player or an athlete is way more likely to get injured than I am, just by the fact that they're playing the game. And in some regard, when you're working on your voice, it's like working out or anything else, there's always going to be a level of risk that is attached to that because you're using it in this very kind of specific type of way. That being said, it is important to do, you know, everything we can to have a healthy voice, you know, for a long time, you know, for our whole life. So the 2 that I'll talk about is nodules and polyps. So nodules are almost like a callus that form on your voice. And we saw a huge wave of them when the big belters were popular. So like Idina Menzel, Adele, like singing super loud and super hard and super kind of belty, led to like a big wave of people getting nodules or nodes. And even in Pitch Perfect, I think they make jokes about, I have nodes or something, and like kind of that kind of thing. So, if you do get them, there is chance that you can recover with vocal rest. I actually have a friend who he never really did proper vocal training, but he was a worship leader. So he was using his voice all the time. He was also a youth pastor. So then he was also on top of that preaching. And then on top of that, he was in a band on the side. So he was just using his voice way too much and then also didn't really know a ton about technique. So he did get nodes and he went on vocal rest, which is like no singing or whatever, for 8 months. And they went away. The other alternative to that is surgery. So what causes nodes is primarily singing too hard or in too much, especially in like a certain range. Polyps they're finding now are caused more by over breathy singing, and they're seeing it a lot in young girls especially because like Billie Eilish and that whole sound is super popular to sing super breathy, and it's almost like a little bubble that forms within your chord, and singing too breathy too often can cause that. I kind of recently learned that at a masterclass that I went to. And somebody asked the question actually, you know, well, will Billie Eilish get nodes? Not nodes, polyps, does she have them? And his response, which I thought was a good one, was, you know, you really don't know. Sometimes people just, there is a certain element of like, sometimes people can just belt really high. Some people can just sing breathy and it doesn't affect them because we're all different. Our anatomy is all a little bit different. Also, you don't know, she could have really good vocal exercises that she's doing where she is adapting her chords and she's not always singing in that super breathy tone. Or we might find out later that she gets polyps. You don't know. So, but I think where the risk comes in is when people try to imitate that sound, then it can lead to a lot of those issues. And there's nothing wrong. Like I use breathiness in my singing, but I do try to do my vocal exercises and make sure that I'm singing, that I'm not doing that all the time, that I'm doing it only on special occasions when I'm really trying to achieve like a certain type of sound. Okay, so we'll get to questions. Just really quickly, some vocal tips. Vocal rest is extremely important. We talked about that. I don't recommend, if you're sick, pushing through it. I just don't. I know a lot of like even music majors end up with these vocal injuries just because they're singing too much, and then when they're sick, they're just pushing through it. And that leads to, you know, vocal injuries. So listen to your body. If your voice needs to rest, then rest it. If you're feeling continually like your voice is tired, rest it. Try to rest it for 3 days where you kind of do minimal talking and So drinking water. I won't go too much into this because of time, but there's also acid reflux, which is basically when a little bit of stomach acid comes back up, and that can irritate your voice and kind of usually affect your high notes and other things. So if you think that you're having that, you can always experiment with cutting out acidic foods and seeing if that kind of changes. And if you Google acidic like foods, they'll come up as things like chocolate, tomatoes, anything citrusy, anything spicy, anything oily, caffeine, alcohol, those types of things. And then let's see, doing vocal exercises is a good one. So in vocal rest is really like a huge one. And just knowing when you are sick to say no, you know, to be able to kind of protect your voice, not pushing too hard. A lot of times, a side note, a lot of times with like musical theater and stuff, like sometimes the theater directors aren't always as knowledgeable about the vocal health end of things. And they'll say, well, just sing louder. We'll just belt it louder. We'll just, you know, and there is a certain thing, you know, if you want to get the part, maybe you need to do that. I don't know. But, you know, just to be aware of the risks and everything, just to be aware of it so that you're taking, if you are doing that, say you do want the part, so you do kind of push it, you know, that you're taking measures to rest your voice, recover, and that you're aware of this. I wish I never really got super aware of vocal health probably until late into college and after college. And I was a music major. So, and my music major was an emphasis in voice. So, you know, I think it's great. The younger you are becoming aware of, just to protect it as much as you can and do research on it and all these other things. Now with online, you can find so much information. So yeah. So I will, somebody asked about the Santa Ana, or not Santa Ana winds, the smoky. So yeah, the smoky stuff definitely doesn't help. I would definitely drink a lot of water, try not to breathe it in if you can avoid it. And one thing that I do is and that is was recommended to me by an ENT is, I got a cold air humidifier. So getting a cold air humidifier, and I put it on at night, that helps me, or you could also put it on during the day, but cold air humidifier is really good. Okay, so I will take questions now. I know Tami said that she was gonna maybe help with that part of it, if anybody has them.
Yeah, I would say if you have a question, let's type it into the chat so we don't have people talking over each other, and then we can just address them one at a time. If you want to take a second to type your questions into the chat. And then while people are typing, I have a question.
Yeah.
As a theater director, I've heard a lot of crazy things from a lot of young singers about things that they do before a show. And I've heard one person say that they always eat a cheeseburger before a show because it lubricates their vocal cords. I've heard people avoid dairy and chocolate and stuff like that. I've heard like honey and lemon in water. I've heard a lot of different things. What are your big recommendations before like a 3-day weekend performance?
Yeah, so I would say if you are, so I would definitely drink water, but again, you don't want to, you're kind of already in a routine of your life, and you don't want to just drink, you know, say you on average drink 4 glasses of water a day. You don't want to suddenly just like be drinking like gallons of water, but like, you know, be aware that you're hydrated. As far as foods, I personally would recommend, I think most people have a little bit of acid reflux issues. To me, I would not eat a cheeseburger because I know that that would make my acid reflux just go crazy. But if it works for you, it works for you. Personally, I would avoid super overly acidic foods. So whether that's like, I would not have like pizza right before. I would have like kind of things that are, like I said, not acidic, healthy. Yeah, eating healthy, doing your vocal exercises, you know, before, so that you're warmed up, which is that's super important. And this is one that's a little bit more on the nerves end of things or on the like performance things, but you can even tell, like, this is my first time, I should have said that at the beginning, this is my first time doing like a Zoom kind of class. So, you know, you're naturally a little bit nervous, and you can even see, oh, okay, all my energy's up here and it's super like, you know, and so that, if you can do like some light exercise before, you don't want to like overdo it, but going on a walk or doing yoga I've taken some acting classes just because as part of doing singing for film and television, that's part of SAG. So SAGs will sometimes offer like free classes or whatever. So I've taken a few, and almost all of them have said for auditions for actors to do yoga before, because it grounds you. It gets some of that nervous energy out, kind of calms you down. So I would say do light exercise, maybe avoid, as far as dairy stuff. So like, and I didn't say this, so I'm glad you brought it up. Caffeine dries out your your like these sacs that keep your voice lubricated. Caffeine dries you out. So do antihistamines. And so, you know, in general, most ENTs will say, don't take, you know, antihistamines if you can avoid it. Instead, use like Flonase or something like that. So yeah, so that the caffeine and antihistamines dry you out. On the opposite side, dairy can make you more mucousy. And so that's why people kind of avoid it. I would say, I mean, I have a cup of coffee with milk every morning, and whether or not I have something going on, because if I suddenly just cut that out, I wouldn't be as energetic or whatever. So I don't necessarily change that, but I'm not going to have, you know, a cheesy slice of pizza right before a session, because that would just mess me up. So those are my things. But, you know, if eating a cheeseburger makes you sound your best, more power to you. That's okay. I see somebody asked in here, why is a cold, hot, air humidifier better than diffuser that evaporates the water? I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what you mean by a diffuser that evaporates the water. I was more saying a cold air humidifier as opposed to a warm air humidifier. And I actually don't remember why that is, but I do know that like an ENT told me that and other people who have, so the source that I got it from would know why. You might even be able to find it on, like I said, one ENT, the one that I think has like really good information on her website was the Dr. Reena Gupta, who I think has come to OSHA before. I think I've taught Tate before, and Tammy's daughter, and I think she came there, but there's other ENTs too. But anyway, so they would have more of like the scientific reason as to why that is. But a cold air humidifier, I'm not sure what a diffuser that evaporates water. I'm not sure what you're referring to. Maybe that's the same thing. But I was talking about cold air humidifier versus a hot or warm air humidifier. I don't know, there's two cold air. Yeah, if you go to like, so I'll read this. I don't know if people can see it. So they said, I don't know the difference between cold and warm air humidifiers. I only know the ones that evaporate. So if you go to like CVS or any like kind of store like that, they'll have humidifiers there and it will say on it if it's a cold air or a warm air humidifier. And I believe there's ones that are pretty inexpensive, like, you know, like in that $30 to $40 range, maybe even less than that, kind of in that zone. But I've had the same one. I think I spent like $35 on it or something. Usually said, yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. Mine is in the other room. So I'm not sure like what brand it is. And like I said, I bought mine like a long time ago. So I don't really remember what it looks like, but you know, it should say something to that effect on there. So yeah, I don't know. I have essential oil diffusers too. Actually, my husband and I just kind of got them, and you know, they're relaxing. I'm not really sure the relation to the voice, if that would, like, if you just didn't put any oil in it and, you know, you were just diffusing the water. I'm not sure if that's the same thing or not. So, yeah. I don't know if is there anybody else? What about, Mercedes, did you feel like you kind of got like some guidance as far as things you can do to kind of re-enter back into singing?
Yes, thank you. This was so good. I really like this. It was just a good reminder to play around with the exercises. And my son-in-law, he's always singing out loud and like walking around. Like when I talk to my daughter on the phone, I can hear him in the background doing trills, and I just think that that's all it is just get back into, you know, just playing and singing out loud and not having to worry so much about how if I, you know, just, yeah, I think getting back into playing around with the exercises will help me to free up again.
Totally. Just kind of not worrying about it being perfect right away, you know, when you like start. It's interesting. I have worked with another music publisher who's really great, and she does she's on the songwriting end of things, and she does like critiques and stuff, but her name's Susan Koch, and she has like some YouTube stuff and stuff if you're interested in it. But she uses this this like analogy when it comes to songwriting, but I think it's applicable to singing. She always says, you know, if there's a faucet that hasn't been used in a while, you have to turn on the faucet and let the kind of dark goo out before you start seeing the clear water. So she's always like, you've got to just write the bad songs. You just got to write them. And even if you know they're bad, just keep doing it. And then eventually that good stuff is going to come out. And I think, you know, it's kind of comparable to singing, where it's like, you just need to get started in some regards and just, you know, work through, you know, not, you know, being totally comfortable right away.
Yeah. I think it has to do with just letting go and not feeling so, I mean, I went from being in a really open space and feeling really free to being in a closed apartment, and, you know, and that kind of, I think, is most of what's maybe holding me back from just feeling like, oh, everybody can hear me, or, you know, oh, what, you know, I think I just have to not care. And I do better when I'm like walking out in the field and I'm like, oh, and I'm talking to myself and singing out loud and it doesn't matter. And I and everything and everything's fine. But when I'm in these close places, I find, gee, I'm not as expressive. I'm not I'm not playing with my voice like I want to. And I love the tip about yoga because I happen to teach yoga as well. So when you started the breath work, I was like, yes, and I totally get the whole belly breathing. That was just really good confirmation.
Oh, good. Yeah, it is. I say like it's the same as yoga. And then also somebody recently said that they actually are encouraged to breathe that way in therapy, which I thought was interesting. Like their therapist was kind of like teaching them to breathe that way. So there must be some other, multiple benefits to breathing that way outside of singing, which is cool. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah. Is there any other questions or?
Is that everything? No other questions? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording.